short story collection, The Whispering Trees, which was shortlisted for the Kim Prize for African Writing and the Etisalat Prize for Literature. He is also the recipient of the Elliott Award for Excellence in African Storytelling, the BBC African Performance Prize, and has received several international fellowship and residencies. Welcome, Abubakar Ibrahim. We are very grateful that you are able to join us. Next, I want to introduce another panelist of great distinction. JahRose Jafta, an entrepreneur and creative strategist born in South Africa's Free State, a dynamic force. She's an author of children's books like Mantlaweni Molo Lekshin, apologies for my not pronouncing too well. Jafta serves as a publishing coordinator at the University of the Free State's African Languages Press, enriching the African Languages Catalog, founding some pure with 40 publications, spanning poetry, prose, and translated works. Apologies. Founding some pure with 40 publications, spanning poetry, prose, translated works. She's an international performing poet, writer, and festival curator. She has a master's in creative writing, and she's won Dream Girl Scholarship and some other awards. Welcome, JahRose Jafta. We are very grateful that you are able to join us. Our third panelist, extremely well distinguished and well known, Professor Bill Indé. And Professor Bill Indé, a poet, playwright, storyteller, critic, translator, and fellow of the Booker T. Washington Leadership Institute. He's an American Southern Cameroonian who was educated at the University of Yaoundé in Nigeria and Paris, where he obtained his doctorate degrees in languages, translation, literatures, contemporary civilizations. He has held teaching positions at the Paris School of Languages, the University of the Sunshine Coast at CP Downs, the University of Queensland, Brisbane, St. Lucia. He's presently Professor of Modern Languages, Communication and Philosophy at Tuskegee University, Alabama. He has published well over 40 books in various genres. Please welcome Professor Indé. It's also my pleasure to introduce another of our panelists who is based in Egypt. I don't know whether Ashraf Dali. She is a talented and young writer coming from a long genealogy and lineage of writers. She's extremely prominent, very well read, and you are going to see our talent on display this afternoon. Thank you all. I want to introduce the Dr. Okedira, who currently heads the Pan-African Writers Association, to make an opening remark and introduce a guest who wants to say hello to all our panelists. Dr. Wale Okedun, please.
Okay, thank you, Professor Falola. Let me thank you once again for collaborating with the Pan-African Writers Association. This is about the 6th occasion of our collaboration, and we are always grateful for the opportunity to use your platform to discuss literature, particularly African literature, and also to link up with our members who are all over the globe. I think we still have one more panelist to be introduced. The lady from Tanzania. Professor Lola, I think.
Please, you can go ahead and do that for me, please.
Okay, I'm trying to see if I can locate her. Yes. Anyway, I will continue my short presentation until I discover I can locate her. And to also say that our panelists are distinguished writers, librarians, and publishers in their own right. And they have given out of their very tight schedule to be with us today. I also want to welcome them, and also to say that we are looking forward to intervention from the participants. I think we have about 60-something participants on the who have joined us now, and I believe more will join us as we progress. Because Professor Lola has been very worried about we writers and how we are a bit media shy. We don't like coming out on video. And I told him that, well, writers by tradition like to write. And usually they like to be isolated somewhere so that they can write well. They don't like coming out publicly. But today, I'm happy that we have a sizable number. And I'm sure we're going to have more number as we progress. The other fellow I wanted to introduce, she hasn't joined us. Maybe by the time we commence, she will have joined us. She's there's a newly registered association called World Organization of Writers, made up of several international writers organizations. And the organization will be having its first Congress in Nigeria, in Abuja to be specific, between April 4 to 6 this year. And the president, Margarita Al, who is from Moscow, wanted to say hello to writers, but as of now, I've been trying to alert her. Maybe the Moscow time is confusing her. Anyway, before we conclude our event, she will join us and then we can bring her on. At this point, I just want to hand over to Professor Lola and to thank the panelists who have given up their time to be here today, and to say that I also want to thank the panelists and the participants too. Many of them are joining from different time zones. Some of them very early in the morning, some going to late hours. All of you are welcome. I want to thank you. So, Professor Lola, please, I will hand over to you, and then at any time I want to come back, I will let you know. Thank you so much.
Feel free to join the conversation. Let us, and if our Tanzanian colleague has joined us, please let us know. Let us bring all the panelists together so that we can begin this conversation. All the panelists, please. The way we want to organize this, where is Ashraf, please? Bring her there. The way we want to do this is to give each person 10 minutes to discuss their favorite books. They will highlight the books, they will tell us their reasons. And then that will be the first part. The second part, we ask the audience to join. They may also talk about their own favorite books. And then the third part, how do we move African literary writings forward in terms of visibility, prominence, African-based awards? So this first segment is to lead to subsequent ones, so that at the end of this conversation, we have significant takeaway that will guide what we do next. Let me start with Abubakar Ibrahim, and then I move clockwise. Thank you.
Hi, good evening, and good morning, and good afternoon, wherever you are. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here to talk about African literature. I feel like we haven't had enough of these conversations, especially involving Africans talking about African literature. To talk about my favorite books for 2023, I'm glad you rephrased this as favorite books for 2023 instead of the best books of 2023, because how do you judge which book is the best, right? And considering that I don't know about the others, but we haven't read all the books that were published in Africa in 2023, or by Africans, right? So these are some of the favorite books that I happen to read, some of the ones that stood out for me. To start off, I'd like to talk about Leila Abulela's The River Spirits. I have a copy of it here. This is the book. And it's a historical novel set in Sudan in the late 1880s, when Sudan was kind of in a flux, transitioning from the Ottoman Empire to the British Empire. And it follows the story of several characters, I think about 7 or 8, if I remember correctly. And, basically it kind of follows how this religious fanatic, the Mahdi, came into the scene. And first it was about revolution, about resisting the Ottoman Empire's influence on Sudan. And then it became more about greed, right? His greed for power, his desire to kind of like be in control of everything. And then at the heart of the story is these people who were basically resisting the Mahdi and realizing that he's a false prophet and all of that. And notable among the characters and probably the heart of the story is Akwani, who later becomes Zamzam in the story, as she was called, who was an enslaved Sudanese girl who was adopted by Yasin, who eventually kind of, they had this very strong connection. And Yasin was very influential in resisting the Mahdi, and that resistance of this oppressive fanatical regime tears the characters apart, throws their life into flux and all of that. So basically, Akwani's life and Yasin's life and their relationship kind of mirrors the flux that Sudan was in at that time in its history. I think this is a very beautiful, beautiful novel, very well told. What I like about it is the richness of the story, right? How it intertwines the history of a country and the history and the people in the story and the people in that country. I thought Leila Abulela did a fantastic job with that. I like the writing. I've always liked Leila's writing anyway. Yeah, here I think she was very, very she was very descriptive, but the writing is also sparse. and it just shows you the mastery of her prose and her crafting of story and her storytelling abilities. And yeah, I think it's really a beautiful story, well told, and the way she kind of moves you as the reader through various degrees of emotions and how you feel the connection with the characters was really outstanding for me. So Leila Abu Leila did a fantastic job in Rebel Spirits, one of my favorite books by an African in 2023. So that is my first book. That is the first one. If you haven't read it, I would strongly recommend that you do it. It's really delightful. The second book I'd like to talk about is Kalaf Epalanga's Whites Can Dance Too, both by Feba and Feba. I have a copy here. Beautiful book. So this is the story of a character who is called Kalaf. Kalaf Palanga happens to be an Angolan writer and an Angolan DJ, an Angolan musician. Kalaf Palanga is a man of many hats. Brilliant, brilliant mind. But his novel is basically about a character called Kalaf Palanga who happens to be basically traveling around the world, right? Kind of promoting this brand of music, Angolan music called Kuduro. And he has this massive event in Norway, in Oslo, right? And during his travels to Oslo, he lost his documents and suddenly, instead of being on stage for the biggest event of his life, he finds himself in a detention center because he's considered an illegal immigrant. And from that detention center in Oslo, he takes us on a journey across the world to different parts of the world where he had been before and how he had kind of engaged with people. And at the heart of the story is music. So there's a lot of music in the story. There's music as an escape. There's music as redemption, music as hope, and all of that. And it's a very different story. I don't think we've read a lot of the stories before. Of course, we've read a lot of immigrants' narration coming out of Africa. This is different. It's not necessarily an immigrant story per se. It's a story of an African traveling the world and actually spreading something that is considered authentically African. Right. So the whole idea is like, we're traveling the world and introducing this brand of music and making connections and using music to break down the cultural and political divides between people, between races, and all of that. But then somehow, he finds himself being detained in a detention center from where the story unfolds. It's a beautiful, beautiful story, well told. And I think there's something fascinating about the storytelling as well. The fact that the narrative is musical as well. It's very evocative. It's brilliant. It's so that is my second recommendation. One of my favorite books, 2023, Kalaf Epalanga's Whites Can Dance Too. The third book, I think someone borrowed my copy or something. I can't find the information. I must have left it somewhere else. It's The Middle Daughter by Chika Onigwe. She's a Nigerian writer. She was also the winner of the Nigeria Prize for Literature in 2012. And The Middle Daughter is her fourth novel. And it's a very, very wonderful book. Very interesting. It kind of follows the story of 17-year-old Nani who becomes entangled with this preacher guy who actually is a charlatan, and he finds her at a moment where she's emotionally vulnerable because she had just lost her dad and lost her sister, and there is this disconnect between her and the remaining members of her family, and so she finds comfort and solace in this preacher charlatan character who is called Ibrahim. And eventually she discovers that this person who comes into her life at the moments of her vulnerability isn't quite the person that she thought he was. So she ends up in this abusive relationship with this person, and then she really couldn't get out. It's a painful read. I'm going to say that, but it's also very eye-opening. And because I think maybe I kind of see the political in a lot of things these days, for me, that story kind of seems like a metaphor for the circumstances of Africa, where, you know, people kind of look to certain people as leaders and they invest their hope in these people to provide solution, to provide escape for them. And, they end up empowering these people to manipulate them, to abuse them, to do all of that. So I know Chika didn't write this as a political commentary, but it also reads as a political commentary. But basically, this is a story about, the abuse and subjugation of women, the charlatanism that has become part of religion these days. It's a social critique. It's a political commentary. It's a commentary about relationships and peoples and how people find connections with each other. So those are the top 3 books that I would recommend for 2023 that actually came out this year. Those are the ones that I read and I enjoyed, and I hope people can find them and read them too. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I love the presentation, spelling out what they contain and why you like them. And members of the audience that keeps growing, please, you're going to ask questions later on. So what ties your 3 books together? I see the tropes of politics, trying to change society through gender.
I think for me, it's the social commentary that is kind of embedded in all the stories. First, Leila's story is historical fiction, right? But it's also a political commentary about a country that is in transition, that is caught between 2 powers, right? The Ottoman Empire on one hand, and then the British Empire, right? That was kind of coming to take over. And then in the middle of that, you have religious fanaticism that kind of echoes, in a way, for me, sort of echoes the Boko Haram crisis that we're having in Nigeria to an extent. And the overwhelming problem that we have of religious charlatanism across the continent, where you see Africans being abused by people who consider themselves religious leaders, so there's that element in that story running through. And that element kind of echoes in Chika Onigwe's story as well, because, hers is, while Leila's is kind of more epic, if that is the right word to use, more broad, more sweeping. Chika's story is kind of more individualized, right? Where at the heart of the story is this nanny who is 17 years old, but she also falls victim to this religious charlatan. And you see how he abuses her, just as the Mahdi, the character in Leila's novel, kind of did with the people around him and the entire country as a whole. Bella's story kind of ties in with this because it's also this story of Africans kind of trying to find their place in the world and situating themselves in the scope of things. And in this instance, the Africans are not the ones just waiting to be influenced. I mean, he was more or less waiting in prison and or the detention center for a long time. But at the same time, he was traveling and kind of spreading his influence and reaching out. So there is that level of connection. There's that, if you like, you could also say like it's sort of intertextual in a way, how they connect and weave into each other. And yeah.
So there is this argument, which is a 30-year-old argument, when some people began to say they are doing literature, they're not doing African literature. How will you relate these 3 books to that long standing argument? It generated some essays between Bessie and Achebe years ago.
Yeah. So if I think I understand where you're coming from, I've also been a critic of this, that there is a certain assumption that is placed on African writers, and by extension, African writing, and by extension, writing about Africa, where it is supposed to explain your Africanness, your being human, your being a person, worthy of being considered a person. That's where you have to explain your culture, your identity, how you look, how your hair feels, and things like that. And at the same time, there has been this tradition of kind of limiting African literature to maybe social and political critique, where it doesn't matter what the story is about, it has to say something about the African condition. And I think that is kind of really interesting that trope, if you like, has persisted over the years, over the decades, right? To the extent that unfortunately you find some people in academia, and I say some, who when they're engaging with any African text, they will be like, so what is this book saying about the African condition? What is it saying about the situation in the country? And that kind of is inherent from the way that maybe non-African critics have kind of approached African literature, in the sense that, for instance, if you write a book about Nigeria, it is expected that your book is going to address Boko Haram, it's going to address kidnapping, it's going to address female genital mutilation, things like that. And then your story is not about female genital mutilation. It has nothing to do with Boko Haram. It's also a story. Right? You don't bring that same lens or that same frame to the critique of books written by maybe, let's say, an American writer, for instance. You don't say, well, how does this explain the political situation in America? How does this explain maybe child abductions that are going on, or school shootings or things like that? You never hear anybody say, well, this is a brilliant book, but it doesn't talk about school shootings in America. It doesn't talk about gang attacks in the UK, things like that. So these three books have sort of shifted away from this perspective of trying to explain your Africanness. They just talk about situations that they feel are relevant to their own story, the old narration of the author. I think maybe Kalaf's kind of is a bit more edgy in that sense, because it kind of moved away from all that trope or that narrative about, okay, how is this a commentary about your country, about your situation, and all of that. So yeah, I think these are really good books. I enjoyed reading them, and I feel they also speak to these issues.
What are you working on? You
well,
speak for 5 minutes, 10 minutes. What are you working on now?
Interestingly, I had a book that came out last year, called When We Were Fireflies. It will be self-serving, I guess, to kind of say, well, that's
no, it's not self-serving. It's not
yeah, to say it's one of the books that people should look at.
So you didn't, at least you didn't select it as one of your best books. So
no, I can't say that.
So tell us
that
about
is for the readers to do.
Tell us about your own book.
Currently, I'm working on what I hope is going to be my next novel. It's all done. I'm just revising it for now, and yeah, it kind of touches about the legacy of military dictatorships in the lives of one particular family, and how that legacy, even though it's like 20, 30 years gone.
So we still have the antelopes of the savannah?
No. It's a commentary on how decades of military dictatorships have left a lasting legacy in the life of people, even though we don't acknowledge that this is where this trauma and this PTSD is coming from.
Well, Bia is not a military figure.
Well, yeah, Bia is not. A lot of these tyrants are not. But oppression, dictatorships, basically they are all the same thing, right? Yeah, so from that perspective, you can look at its oppressive regimes, dictatorships, and all that, and how they kind of sustain this influence on the lives of people. Because I don't think it's possible for somebody to live under oppression for 40, 50 years and then have that not impact on the way they live their lives, on the way they perceive things, and on the traumas that they've carried over from that period. So yeah, that's what I'm working on. And
so as an historian, I've not read the novel. It's not been released, but I will agree with that statement because look at how the Europeans set up Africa.
Mhm.
During the colonial period, they governed as authoritarian. That's what they did. There was no democracy.
Mhm.
So, and then when they wanted to leave, they said, now go and conduct elections. So they took power from the chiefs and kings and then in their sovereignty. That was in the last 15 years of the 19th century. As they were leaving, they did not return power to those that they took it from. They give it to an elite that they themselves created, using their own education institutions to create them. And the problematic has been there ever since, in which part of what your novel is trying to say is actually rooted deeply in history. I just finished a book myself on Achebe that Bloomsbury will be published, in which I turn all his works into what historians call the archive. And I'm not doing critical appraiser. I'm just saying, suppose this is the only document I have to write the history of Africa. What will that book tells me? And I map all his books, each of them, into historical era, speaking to what that era represents. I'm coming back to you because it's been very engaging and I look forward to, but I'm still coming back to you.
Yeah, can I say something before we?
Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Because you talked about how colonialism kind of structured democratic transitions on the continent and created a new class of elites and handed over power to them. I think when we talk about these things, we often neglect to talk about how this power was transient and how this modern democratic culture was consistently interrupted through the influence of these colonial masters, right? Who sponsored coups, plotted assassinations, right? Someone like Patrice Lumumba, for instance, he was murdered under the influence of the colonial administrators, right? Belgium. Belgium played a significant role in destabilizing the Congo. Uh, Britain had an influence in destabilizing countries like Nigeria and all of that. Portugal had a significant role in destabilizing Angola. You know, we had all these situations where in theory, we had independence. In theory, we're supposed to practice democracy. Yes, we say, well, Africans were prone to coups and military takeovers. But France especially demonstrated every single time that if there's any democratically elected president in any African country that won't play ball with France, it's either he's assassinated or he's eliminated or there's a military takeover, right? Sponsored by France. And that was the modus operandi for a lot of countries. So when we talk about the instability in Africa and the poor democratic culture, we must also acknowledge that these interruptions were sponsored and instigated by these people who supposedly handed over democracy to us and independence and all that. So that was the point I just wanted to.
Yeah, and thank you. But one challenge I have is that our literary folks are more fascinated with the political side of things, as you have just narrated. But there is the depth of culture, far more devastating in some ways than the politics we look at. So if you've read Okwewo and Nungugi to some extent, you see some shifts to that culture. And I think as part of this conversation, when there are younger people, we can also use opportunities like this to say these are some of, you can't control people's creativity. I can't control yours, you can't control mine. But we can gesture at some topics, as some people do with respect to ecology, sexuality, environment. Thank you very much. I'm coming back to you. Bill, is your next. What mountain is behind you?
That's Mount Kilimanjaro.
Did you climb it at some point when you were young?
Well, I'm planning, that's where I'll write my next book.
That's very fine, and it will prevent you from diabetes and that attack.
Thank you.
As you are climbing the mountain, your diseases will be disappearing.
That's it. That's it. Thank you very much. Thank
Please,
you.
I will join you. The plane will drop me at the top of the mountain.
And then I'll come meet you at the top, then we come down together.
Please, you have the floor, your favorite books.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Falola, and thanks to everybody in the audience. And thanks to my fellow panelists. I really will not delay gratitude for this opportunity, that when we are selected to sit on a panel like this and talk about our literature, it is one of the best moments in time. And we should really revel and enjoy every minute of it. I did enjoy my brother Abubakar's explanation and everything. All the books he considered his favorite. I will talk about my favorite book, but I was wondering if I could share my screen.
Share your screen. Do you have, please, do you know how to use share?
They say the host.
You are a co-host, so you can share.
Okay.
You know how to share a document?
Yes.
Please go ahead. You're a co-host.
If I've been made co-host, then that will be.
Yes, you are a co-host. Yeah. Okay.
All right. Let's see. Just one wee second. Where is the slideshow? All right. Thank you very much. I just like to thank Professor Falola and Power for giving us this opportunity to talk about outstanding African creative books written in English, looking at novels, poetry, children's book, given today, February 25th. Well, a little bit of information about me. And the first book I picked is a book of poetry. All the books I'm going to discuss are mostly poetry books. And the commonality, first of all, throughout here, is I'm fascinated with the terseness and imagistic use of poetry by the poets that we will talk about. I decided to talk on the book Unraveling by Su Nyamjo, who is a young Cameroonian living in South Africa, was born in South Africa, lives in South Africa. And I look at her work, which covers a whole lot of themes. And she approaches her work with a kind of Keatsian lens. When I talk of Keatsian lens, I'm looking at John Keats, who is the father of negative possibilities. And I think African writing should embrace, given our worldview and the experiences we have had historically and otherwise, to embrace our history with that Keatsian lens. And she uses in her works, as I'll demonstrate with one or two of her poems, very colorful, lyrical, and at times prosaic language, which simply takes the reader into the beauty of what she calls unraveling. Each of her poems in that collection is an invitation for us to consider our own experience of fulfillment in life. And this is the book cover. And Sue, as I say, in every verse possible in her poetry, she invokes the impossibility of satiation. That is, we cannot be satisfied with everything that life has in stock for us. So she deals in her poetry with the good, the bad, and the ugly. And this collection, as I said before, the terseness of the poems therein, written even in a way that a third grader, meaning a 7 or 8-year-old child, could pick and read without having any trouble, is one of the things that compels me to look at her poetry as some of the outstanding work, because we have this conception, either as poets, as critics, that the more complex the work of poetry is, the better. But we have this younger crop of writers on the African continent who are there to tell us that the sophistication of poetry is not in its complexity, but in its simplicity, with complex thought that they provoke. So I did take an excerpt from her collection, Unraveling, which I'll read. She said, I made a mistake, forgot the rules of impermanence, forgot forever is a myth. Now each string is stretched, taut, throbbing with the painful memory of what is no more, can be no more. Now I seek relief. I want the sweet, soothing feel of a healing balm, massaged gently between warm, nurturing palms and rubbed into my ailing heart. That's the end of the first poem. And you see the poem, one would look at that poem and think that the poem might just be a series of words thrown on paper. No, the CPR is much more than words thrown on paper. I would say maybe I comment on CPR before I continue to the next poem, because that word, the title itself, CPR, stands out like a kind of pulmonary resuscitation. That's cardiopulmonary resuscitation, which is a medical procedure. And I think what this young writer is doing is using this metaphor of a medical procedure to revive someone, to revive our literature and revive the literature from stopping to beat. So we see in it the speaker beginning by acknowledging a mistake and reflecting on a certain rule that is impermanence. She goes on to emphasizing the transient nature of things. And all of this simply sets the stage for the exploration of the aftermath of mistakes. Like Professor Falola and Brother Abubakar mentioned earlier, what happened during the colonial period right? There were certainly mistakes made. And what is the aftermath of those mistakes? How are we dealing with it? How are we handling those things? How are we handling something like the themes of impermanence? How can we emphasize the fact that the realization of permanence is a myth? So I could go on and discuss. The poem is replete, the imagery, the loss and memory, the theme of desire has a symbolism of healing balm, which means all is not lost when we find ourselves in a quandary. So I'll just say to conclude this short poem, we can say by exploring the themes of impermanence, loss, and the desire for healing, this poem, which is a metaphor for CPR, suggests an attempt for us as writers to see what we can do to revive, resuscitate something that has been lost. We did hear about African literature trying to be judged by standards that are foreign, that are extraneous, or trying to dictate what African literature should be. But this poem is a reminder that we should not, as writers, we should, in practicing our writing, we should use that writing as a balm in a gentle palms that we rub in between the ailing hearts. And when you rub that balm with gentleness, that is soothing, it is calming, it is healing. I would pause on that poem and move on to the next of our poem, which she entitles Catch and Release. She entitles the poem Catch and Release. And the poem reads, I've been held in the palm of many hands. And if I close my eyes, I can still trace the lines across each broad palm that cupped me between its calluses. With time, those very hands that formed my cradle stretched out ever so slowly, lifting me up only to tilt me to the side and dust me off like unwanted crumbs. We have talked about our literature being treated as an undesirable literature, whereas it has everything. Like our first speaker mentioned, that the use of the word best literature or best book was not ideal, but favorite will be ideal. And I remember sitting on a panel of judges to determine a prize, and I made clear that all the books in contention were equally good books in their own right and could win any prize that they could get into. So a poem like Catch and Release suggests that cycle of being captured and set free. And if we look at Africa, the Black man all over the world, aren't we victim of a catch and release somehow? Let's think about the imagery of the palms of the hand that creates a very tactile and intimate atmosphere, okay? The palms in this poem, they're not just physical, they're symbolic, and they represent the holder of the speaker's own experiences. And we understand that our experiences as a continent, as people, our continents, whether our experiences are being toiled around with. And this poem has a lot of sense, a sense of touch, the visual imagery, the evolution of relationship, the symbolism of dusting. We could go on and on and on and on with just this poem. And when we reflect on the tone, which is one of the things that caught my attention very much, which is very reflective and carries a sense of acceptance. Accepting who we are is crucial for Africans to embrace their literature and not allow their literature dictated by exogenous forces, not let their literature be dictated from the pulpit of colonial thought. I think these two poems from Sue will do it. Let me move to the next, to my next book. I don't know how many minutes I have, but
please keep talking. You have
all
time.
Right.
Keep
okay,
going.
Thank you. My next favorite book was a book by Moshume Tidewu, who is a Mauritian. And as you would see from the slide, I just talked of her poems being loaded with uncanny thirstness, with which thirstness her language rumbles and compels with minimalism, which speaks volume. The themes she deals with, they are very current. They deal with the themes of hybridization, the profane and the sacred. There are poems that it shows her anger, okay? And the anger is not for any other thing. It is a thirst for her freedom. Just reading the book, I'll say a thing or two about her being Mauritian, Mauritius Island. She's an Indo-African. And at every time in her life, she's like she would always say, she has find herself trying to justify her Africanness, Does an Indo-African have to justify or explain their Africanness? That shouldn't be the case. So her work explores this lingering memory and invites the reader to ponder, the recurring motif of fear, dissolution, grief, which embody the guiding, principle towards reconciliation when we are caught in the grip of painful existence. So this is what Ahmed Said Katke, who is a literary critic and research fellow at the Institute for Humanity, that is HUMA, University of Cape Town, says on her work. She says, Echo of the Giant marks the 5th chapter of Moshume Tidewu's poetic odyssey. It is a journey in a world where memories pulse with life, emotions cascade like melodies, the ordinary becomes extraordinary, and words become the prism, refracting the light of our shared brokenness or our vulnerability after pain and the internal battles against this, and echoes of the giants rummaging through the body, mind, and soul in search of peace. So let's look at her poem, Paz. The title of the poem is Paz, which interestingly is the Spanish word for peace. And this title adds an interesting layer to the poem, especially considering the mixed emotion and imagery presented within the verse. And I'll read the poem and talk a little bit about the mixed emotions and it suggests a few things about the poem, why the poem sticks out to me, and when I use this sample of poetry, it is a reflection of what all the poems in the collections are. All the poems are this terse, this brief, and they speak truth to literary power. And this poem reads, "The raven clocks black beneath my breast, a loaded guard, a cold complex, a sob of thunderbolt, a bold and blind tempest, a test and gold for a quest, for a night past, for the good things I have got going. Je ne veux pas m'affranchir. I do not care what comes next." Now, looking at this poem, we see it loaded with these metaphors. We see it talking about a quest. We see the introduction of the French line there, the one but last line, where she talks of "Je ne veux pas m'affranchir," which is simply a French phrase which would translate verbatim, "I do not want to break free," or "I do not want to emancipate myself." However, we understand that she is talking about peace. It is emancipation from peace, which means she is determined to keep the peace going. And we could say a lot more, but let me read the next poem, which is called House of Guilt. House of Guilt. And House of Guilt in this collection reads simply, "It haunts you, I know, through the walls and the roses, scheming of a prized sting in your sleep. I know it's not the real thing. I know the thorns of your conscience are up for a hit and run. There is nothing here to borrow." And House of Guilt actually is a powerful persuasion of the nature of guilt and its impact on individuals. We know very well, I know at least for me, when I was in elementary school, one of the ideal expressions when we caught our friends doing something wrong was that a guilty conscience need no judge. So this is almost that saying or proverb taken back and explained otherwise. So this poem, which is filled with imagery, also has a lot of repetition. If we look at the repetition of the expression, "I know," the speaker tries to use that to reinforce awareness of the haunting presence of guilt. When you have guilt, it is like you're haunted by a ghost. And that repetition actually adds to this poem rhythmic qualities. And we could see the poem goes on, uses lots of metaphors. The poem is fragmented in a way, and the tone remains very introspective. Because when somebody is dealing with guilt, it is not something they take to the market. And this poem speaks volumes to that. And just to conclude on this poem, which is more like a poignant exploration of the emotional turmoil associated with guilt, the poet makes use of imagery, repetition, contrast, and metaphors, all of which contribute to the nuanced portrayal of the speaker's internal struggles. When we read that last line, which comes across like a fragmented ending, there is nothing here to borrow. Isn't this an invitation for the reader of the poem to reflect on the themes and consider the implications of the incomplete phrase? So let's move on. I'll do one more poem, and then I move to the third work. And this poem is titled Future Thoughts. And I was very delighted having selected this poem, hearing Professor Falola talks about, after we give all of this presentation, we will be reflecting on where we go from here. What is the future? What are we going to do? And future thoughts, okay, is actually just a concise yet impactful exploration of existential dread and reflection on the complexities of life and death. Here, so the poem simply reads, I dread life in multiples, the many of me stuck between stories in parts that left us. I don't want to see you tonight. The dead must dance in thoughts at dust. So we look at the poem. What does it suggest? Or what is this poem saying that is so captivating that I would list the whole collection, which reads just like this, to be one of my favorite. We look at one, the contemplative nature of what lies ahead. The speaker suggests a forward-looking perspective and reflections as well as music. You look at the structure of the poem, very short, 5 lines, 5 or 6 lines straight, and the imagery, if we look at words like dread, lives in multiples, or stuck between stories, these imageries are powerful, and there is multiplicity there and fragmentation. Talking about lives in multiples, it is like every human being has multiple experiences, and each experience is a life lived experience. And the poet delves on themes which the reflection on existential reflection, the desire and avoidance, talks about the dance of the dead. And the poem actually maintains something that I cherish most in poetry, which is a level of ambiguity, which leaves certain elements of the poem open to interpretation, which is also an invitation to the readers to project their own experiences, their own emotions onto the verses, making this poem a very relatable and thought-provoking one. So to say the least, the poems in this collection are really exploration of existential themes that captures the speaker's contemplation on life in general, its multiplicity, the dance of thoughts in the face of mortality, and the brevity of the poem, coupled with the vivid imagery. It might be suggestive of the shortness of life and something that allows for a concentrated and emotionally charged experience. This collection is an invitation for us to reflect on our relationship with life and the passage of time. We can only reflect on our relationship in life and write only about the things that others want us to write about, but we can write about the things that we hold dear to our hearts. So I will move on there and go to the next. The next book I did pick, I didn't have the humility of my brother Abubakar, but it was not with bad taste. I said I would commit a kind of incest, which is to bring to the limelight also something which was born of a simple thought by one of our ancestors. The late Chinua Achebe pointed out that words, proverbs, are the palm oil with which words are eaten. And last year, I had completed a book of sayings, a book of just wise sayings that are relevant to literature, to history, that, can help us put a set of lenses on that would allow us to see a bigger picture for the struggle we are in as a people. So I wrote the book, The Quotable Uncle. You would ask, why The Quotable Uncle? I'll take the opportunity to thank many of my students who are on the call and who are watching live. I want to thank them because this book is a dedication to my students who all call me uncle. I'm the uncle to every student I teach. They are my nieces, they are my nephews. So I found myself constantly giving them advice using proverbs. And at one point I just said, well, why don't I just put together these proverbs so that they can access it in one place? If you read it, it might make sense to you. So this book, as you would see, I say this is the editorial blurb, which defines the book as a delightful treasure trove of timeless, sagacious sayings, inviting the reader to reflection, meditation, and hope as processes through which to learn, plan, rejuvenate, and commune with the innermost self. This pleasurable read comes at a time as the bitter pills of truth, whose discomfort shows where and when one has reneged on his or her highest values, or again has strayed away from his or her dreams. In an age when incoherence, noise, chaos surround people in unprecedented ways, the Quotable Uncle One shines the light on the real power that pushes the reader towards a conscious, deliberate, meaningful, peaceful opportunity to expand upon his or her self-awareness, dream, pursuit, drive, development, character building. So the quotes are very lively, refreshing, and thus as they are in their insightfulness. Each quote stands as an essential wisdom for profound meditation, capable of projecting beauty and grandeur out of the deeps that cradle thoughts and aspirations, good for both the individual and society. These are a few of the quotes. I will read them out and just leave the readers to make sense of them. The first of them, which I just picked, I picked them randomly. So I said the African Revolution will be effective only when its starting point is from that of ideas and mentalities. And the next is weeding out corrupt and endogenous and exogenous ideas and perceptions will transform Africa as well as any society into paradise here on earth. And I go on, weeding out corrupt, we already talked about that. As the saying goes, dictators differ, patients die, or doctors differ, patients die. So is it true with poverty in Africa? Differences in opinion from Africans keep Africa poor. And the oppressor has understood this much. Africans, wake up before it is late. And the next is, what is poverty if not a perception or a state of mind? And the last two, the education we receive is in the interest of he or she who paid for the curriculum designer. And I conclude with the 4 I's leading to invention. That is imagination, interest, investigation, and investment. And I say, let your imagination lead you to that which you want to invent. Take interest in that which you want to invent, investigate that which you want to invent, and invest in that which you want to invent. The result is undoubtedly invention. I want to thank you, Professor Falola, and the panelists and the listeners for listening to me talk about these books. And I just want to say, with the choice of the third book, I didn't only take it because I wrote the book. I picked it because I felt in this day and age, when people pick, they run just with headlines. We should give them something to read that they will take one line and it will spur and spark their thinking throughout the day. So I thank you for listening. I will stop the screen share.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So it's my turn to ask you questions.
Thank you.
How do we evaluate motivational books? Because the last one you chose is the books you find at the airport. We don't classify it generally as part of creative writing.
Okay. Thank you, Prof, for that question. I'll beg to differ in this case because the books, the sayings, maybe the ones I read to you came across more as motivational books, but there are books of proverbs, there are books of wise sayings, there are books which guide to creativity. There are books that tell, that have us reflect, just like a poem will have you reflect on life's situation. Those sayings, they challenge you to think out of the box.
But the sayings have always been part of literary writing.
Yes.
So you invoked Achebe previously. The proverbs are woven into things fall apart.
Yes.
Mythologies are woven into Shoyinka's books and things like that.
Yes.
So as a standalone, let's say, I know proverbs also fall into the genre of creativity. I just want to know how we can take this kind of writing into a genre specific unto itself and begin its evaluative process.
Okay, I didn't look at it in the sense of a genre in itself, because as a poet, this is what I do as a poet. I believe poetry is that which has the ability to say a lot more in a little space. And with this in mind, I use my poetic inspiration to say a lot more in a little space and in a prosaic language that is understood by all, and giving them just something to reflect on. We know very well, if you look at the 3 works I have picked, I insist that it is about their terseness. It is about their brevity. It is about how they present what they are presenting. So I think right there, if we are trying to think of it as a genre separate from literary creativity, then I would also want to find out, because I'm thinking and looking at even the Holy Book, like the Bible. It has the book of Proverbs.
Mhm.
It has the book of Proverbs, and that book of Proverbs is an integral part of that holy book, in as much as others would classify the holy book, not literature. The literature in the Bible itself speaks volume and warrants that we reflect. When you're framing literature, when you're classifying literature,
Okay.
it is almost like the battle we find ourselves in, trying to classify maybe what is African literature. And then when the literature is produced, what is this brand of literature? I just look at it.
Thank you.
Yes.
So, but who does this? How did this fragmentation? How did it begin? So you are from Cameroon, Southern Cameroon, and I've been part of there. I've been to Eastern Nigeria. I've listened to many stories and things like that. The African storytellers, even things like Sundiata epic, were they classifying them as genre? This is poetry, this is prose, this is drama. Were they doing it that way? Or is it an European model that we just enter into that trap and begin to use it?
No, I steer clear from the European modelism. And that is why I explained initially that the two young writers I talked about before, they are doing something that most of us, or most of the elderly generation, when you picked a poem written in the 1900s or so, very good, excellent poem, but the complex nature of the poem scared a lot of people. And these young poets, what they're doing is making poetry readable, accessible, enjoyable, and lovable. Now to the question you're asking, I don't think the tale of Sundiata might, our stories, our griots, our historians, when they tell the story, it is a blend of everything. It is poetry, it is music, it is prose, it is history, it is everything in one. And to classify those as poetry modeled after the European fallacy that we fall into, I would not abide by that. I just think we as a people, we can define what is literature for us, what suits us, because I always contend this, that we cannot allow our literature to be judged by standards that are exogenous to us. Because if we set our own standards, it is very certain that not everybody would meet our standards. But
so
for
you've chosen two women, which is good. You've
yes.
chosen, and the rise of women writers. Some people see this as a new phenomenon, and I don't see it as a new phenomenon.
No, it is not.
Because they have been very dominant historically. There were even major female writers in the 80s. People like Patience in Nigeria and others.
Yeah.
So are we dealing with declining patriarchy, the liberation of women, the rise of new voices? Now, is it a rediscovery? What is going on?
Well, to me, my choice of two women writers were not, because if I talk of decline of patriarchy, then I'm accusing feminism or womanism. I'm not going to talk of feminism. I'm accusing the women for doing something they shouldn't be doing, or that they are taking the spotlight. No, my interest in their writings as women. One, I am avowed male feminist. It might be a notion that is foreign to us, but I understand the power of the woman in the African context. And I don't see a man doing anything that a woman cannot do. And if a woman does something that deserves its place on the podium, please put the woman on the podium. Because it is more to celebrate meritocracy than celebrate women for being women writers or men for being men writers. No, I am celebrating the content of what they have written. People might think
well, how will you respond to a person like me that the poems I really enjoy are Yoruba? And because they move my emotions.
Yes.
So as we are reading these poems in English, my emotions are not moved. What's wrong with me?
No, there is nothing wrong with you. I would like to say this, Professor Falola. I'm a disciple, right, of indigenous African languages, and those who are my students on the call would bear testimony. I have encouraged each and every one of them, pick an African language of your choosing, learn the African language. That's the language of your ancestors. If your ancestors 10, 15 generations show up today to you in a dream, and they were to carry a conversation with you, I'm not sure they would understand a word of English. And when you tell me you are moved by poetry in Yoruba, that's fine. Write the Yoruba poetry, read the Yoruba poetry, teach me how to read and enjoy Yoruba poetry. I am all for it. I am all for it. Now, the thing, why I chose this poetry in English is because we talked about works written in the English language.
That's fine. That's fine.
We talked about works written in the English language. Whereas, if we had said works written in the French language, maybe these works would not be the works.
So why do you start your conversation in terms of kids' negative possibilities, in which hold on. The preface is that comparison with a foreign writer. So on the one hand, I see some contradictions in which on the one hand you are affirming Africanity, but to preface your contribution by invoking kids. And hold on, and people like other writers, they said they base their play on Greek mythologies. People have evaluated Shoyinka along the line. Oh, they base their writings on these European styles. People have said mythologies are Greek. Why did you do that? And then the process contradicted yourself.
Well, I have an explanation. I'm happy you did ask that question, because when you use kids who is foreign, it doesn't mean that in a globalized world in which we live interdependently, we cannot borrow or we cannot learn from others and make use of what others have made use of. If kids came to my mind, I am also a scholar who believes in creative interdependence, which means that I am not going to create in a vacuum. I'm not going to live in a world as in isolation. I'm not going to.
Yes. I understand where you are going. But Eshu, the Yoruba god of the crossroads, talks exactly what you have invoked in kids. So I'm going to return to that.
Thank you very much. I'm happy, Prof. I want to thank you because
I would
like to learn about the Yoruba gods of the crossroads.
Don't tag me yet.
Yeah, okay.
Let's go to my sister JahRose. I hope you have not forgotten what you want to talk about. Because if you forget, I will remind you. Okay, your books.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. To all protocol observed in the room. Thank you, Professor Falola. It is really, truly a privilege to be part of the panel reflecting and putting the spotlight on African literature. And it is only us in different parts of Africa that we can truly highlight and introduce these works to one another, but moreover, build profiles of these authors within the continent. So I chose a children's book, which is written by Marcus Mapile. It's published by the African Languages Press at the University of the Free State. So Nyaupe Ruins Lives is a fractured path that delves into the intricate themes of youth, drugs, and their profound impact it has on communities. The author portrays challenges faced by young people in South Africa. And of course, this is a global pandemic of its own. But here we're confronted with the allure of drugs, which then introduces this character called Charles as the protagonist, who becomes entangled in a web of addiction, leading to consequences that reverberate through his family and community. He looks into the personal struggles of Charles with the broader societal issue plaguing South Africa through his journey. We witnessed the harsh realities of substance abuse and the toll it takes on individuals, on families, and the society as a whole. Charles steals from food in the house to electronic appliances. The mother becomes ill from dealing with this frustration. Mob justice comes into play as the community is also frustrated. Charles has wrong friends. Peer pressure has him by the throat. His addiction escalates to health challenges, criminal activities, and ends up being arrested, and essentially a young life is ruined. So I found the depiction of Charles' inner turmoil particularly compelling. His internal conflict between succumbing to the temptations of drugs and striving for a better future reflects the struggles of many young people caught in similar circumstances. It highlights the complex interplay of personal agency and external influences. Charles' journey serves as a microcosm in a larger systematic issue at play. The lack of access to education at times and opportunities, coupled with the pervasive presence of drugs in communities, sets the stage for a cycle of despair. How do you perceive the role of community support in addressing these challenges? Community support is paramount in breaking the cycle of addiction and despair. Through effective efforts, we can provide the necessary resources and guidance to empower young people like Charles to make positive choices and pursue alternative paths. Additionally, fostering a culture of open dialogue and destigmatizing addiction are crucial steps towards building a supportive environment. By encouraging empathy and understanding, we can create a space where individuals feel comfortable seeking help and accessing treatment without fear of judgment. It's essential to recognize that addiction is not only a morality issue, but it's also a health issue as well, a complex health issue that requires compassion and comprehensive intervention strategies. So by addressing the root causes of substance abuse and providing holistic support. We work towards healing individuals and strengthening communities. So this book, Nyaupe, Ruins Young Lives, serves as a poignant reminder of the challenges faced by young people and the urgent need for collective action to create a brighter future for young people, for the youth, who mostly in this country, they are unemployed. The book mirrors the power of storytelling to ignite that empathy and inspire positive change. The book is available in Kiswahili, it's available in Setswana, in isiZulu, and in Sesotho, which are some of the languages that are spoken in South Africa, and of course, Kiswahili in parts of the continent. And one other book that I've chose is written by Jerry Mofokeng wa Makgetha. Jerry Mofokeng wa Makgetha, it's actually Dr. Jerry Mofokeng wa Makgetha, is one of the South African playwrights and actor and an author, a motivational speaker, and a marriage counselor also. So he writes a book called I Am a Man, which also has a Sesotho translation. So Dr. Jerry Mofokeng wa Makgetha offers a profound reflection on manhood, identity, and the complexities of family. One poignant moment from our discussion centered on Jerry's revelation about his upbringing, particularly his discovery of being raised by a stepfather without his knowledge until later in life. Jerry shared with us the deeply personal journey of learning about his biological father at the age of 58 years. Despite already being a husband, a father, and an elder himself, it was a revelation that shook the very foundation of his identity, prompting him to embark on what he describes as a treacherous journey to himself, back to self. What struck me most was Dr. Jerry's nuanced approach to reconciling his newfound knowledge with the reality of the men who had raised him, his stepfather. Despite the shock and upheaval caused by this revelation, Dr. Jerry showed immense grace in acknowledging both his biological father and the men who had played a paternal role in his life. His story serves as a powerful reminder of the complexity of familial relationships and the resilience of human spirit. Through his own experiences, Dr. Jerry then challenges us to confront our preconceived notions of manhood and the importance of embracing both our wounds and our triumphs as integral parts of our journey. I Am a Man is more than just a memoir. It's a call to action for both men and women to participate in the nurturing of boys into men. It encourages us to strive for authentic selfhood and to create a world where masculinity is defined not by bravado, but by vulnerability, empathy, and growth. In this book, Dr. Jerry then takes on new layers of meaning enriched by cultural context and storytelling traditions of his native language. It's a testament to the universality of human experience and the power of language to transcend barriers. So I Am a Man also stems from their proverb that says in Sesotho, Monna kinku ha'ale, loosely translated to a man is a sheep and doesn't cry. And in this book, he actually sends tributes to men finding that safe space for healing and clothing their already bleeding wounds. So as we reflect on their journey, this becomes then the story of maturity, of forgiveness, of healing, of self-discovery, and we are reminded of the importance of embracing our own stories, our scars, and all, and using them as stepping stones towards becoming better versions of ourselves. So he has a way of telling this story and using transliteration and so that he captures well the traditions and the culture and his background of who he is, that then carves his path towards authentic manhood. The last book I want to reflect off, it's another children's book. This one is called Friends of Shangala. This book is written by Dr. Babani, Christina Lungu. He is also one of the lecturers at the University of the Free State. This is a lesson in friendship and integrity. So the book is centered around a few characters. It's animals in this village. And we are introduced to Shongi, the springbok, who lives in this beautiful village of Shangala. She loves her cousin Basi, the bushbuck, and enjoys playing with her every day. One day, Shongi tells the cousin a little secret and says to her, Basi, my cousin, I want to enter the beauty pageant, and all the friends I met at the water hole say that I am beautiful, and I happen to know it too. And Basi says to Shongi, great news. Yes, you are pretty. Just go for it. And Shongi is determined to join this beauty pageant. And in this story, the author then shows the consequences of spreading rumors and telling lies that are vividly portrayed then by Basi, who then goes around the whole village telling them about how Shongi told her that all the girls in the village are ugly and she is the only one who is beautiful. And everybody approaches Shongi angry and frustrated. How could she? And they even go to the king of the village, which is the lion, Chief Langu, who then intervenes, prompting the characters to express genuine compliments towards one another. So this exercise not only highlights the beauty of acceptance and the appreciation, but also exposes the toxicity of gossip and deceit. And Chief Langu Sten's rebuke serves as a powerful reminder of the harm caused by spreading falsehoods and the importance of integrity and friendship, and ask them to actually say something really nice about each other. And Hambi starts and said to all the friends, telling them how pretty they are, how she likes their eyes and the dots on their legs and white drawing around their tails and lines on their faces, how fabulous they are, and how she wishes she was not as small and she was as tall and beautiful as all the other animals in the village, and how she cannot swim and sing like the deer tortoise, and is happy to be laughing. And the eyes were full of tears because now they are recognizing that each and every one of them has their own uniqueness and their own beauty, and all we need to do is look at ourselves and mirror who we are. So this narrative unfolds with the redemption of Akambi, a character known for causing this discord through excessive chatter. Through Chief Langu's firm compassionate guidance, Hambi learns the value of accountability and extends heartfelt apologies to mend broken relationships. So Dr. Babani skillfully weaves together these themes of friendship, forgiveness, and personal growth in Friends of Shangala through the relatable animal characters and storytelling. The book offers valuable lessons for readers in all ages, although it's meant for younger children. The narrative encourages reflection and the impact of our words and actions on others, and underscores the significance of empathy, honesty, and integrity in fostering meaningful connections. In conclusion, Friends of Shanghala is a heartwarming tale that resonates with its audience through its universal themes and timelines of wisdom. So in here, Dr. Babani narrates this prowess and insightful story that makes this book a compelling read for everyone seeking to explore the intricacies of human relationships and power of redemption. Yeah, there are other books that I was looking at, but yeah, because of these three that we were asked to select, it
but
became.
You can talk about the books you have in mind. We are not. If you have some books in mind, you can.
I was looking at the culture on liberation struggle in South Africa, from colonialism to apartheid, edited by Dr. Lance Nawa. I Won't Be There Forever by Stan Montu, which essentially talks about reinforcing and encouraging children to be independent because their parents won't be there forever, to follow their dreams, to dream and to go for their making their lives better in some way or the other. The Girl Who Survived Her Mother by Mushitari Lehlomela, The Lucky Girl by Muchimi Ndirutu, for Black girls who have yet to forgive themselves. So yeah, there was a pool that I could go on and on and on, but yeah, those three, yes, are the ones that I got biased to. And I must say, when Professor Bill Indé was reading the poems, as a poet myself, my heart was just dancing to the musicality of his readings and the poems that were shared. And I don't know, I was just resuscitated. And because, yes, there was CPR there and it meant to do exactly that, I must attempt that I too felt resuscitated. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, my question will not bring out the CPR specialists. I thank you very much for your choice of the books that are written in African languages. And next Sunday, we're talking about the African, we're focusing on African languages specifically, bringing 5 distinguished panelists to talk about African languages. And now, look, if we look at the trope, drugs, masculinity, issues of beauty and sex, what will you tell a Pentecostalist that these are not things we should teach our children?
Our children are already exposed. It is our children who are experiencing. These are their day-to-day realities. There's a school, and there's a tavern, and there's a church, and there's a morgue, all in one street. So from their birth, the system on its own is already designed in ways that impact how they're going to grow up. It is at primary level in schools where these kids are being targeted. Some are even forced to sell. Kids are being adopted. So it is their reality as a nation and in the communities that we come from. A child still wearing a school uniform coming from school can be brought into a place selling alcohol for them to go buy, or to go buy cigarettes being sent to a spaza shop. So that's already their realities. However, I think what these writers are trying to do are trying to have conversations with these young ones to say, what are your views, and also choose better. You have an option to choose better in a world that has already have carved paths for you, for your destiny. You can choose better. So reflect and see Charles and decide that you don't want to be Charles. There's already Charles in your neighborhood. There's already Charles that you know in the classroom. There's already a Charles that you know in your church, but you can choose better. And around the issue of beauty, I think what Dr. Babani is trying to say to these animals in this animal farm, in this village of Shanghala, is that oftentimes we are so self-centered and so self-absorbed in our imperfections, and we are caught in dark emotions, even that we don't even see the sparkles in our eyes as we look into the mirror, because we are so consumed by these negative feelings that we are clothing ourselves with. But oftentimes, if you allow yourself to be more sociable and embrace that is around you, and see the little beauties in what you bring forth in your gifts, in your talents, see that also in the next person, and be able to clap for the next person. And somebody else shining does not necessarily mean it's in the absence of your own. And we are much more stronger and much more powerful, much more colorful when we realize that you might be that eye, but I'm the ear, and somebody else is the hand, and maybe somebody else is the feet that we need to run the race. So we all need one another, and everybody brings something on the table, something beautiful, and that we can highlight and maximize on each other's strengths. And in terms of masculinity, in this book, Dr. Jerry actually reflects more on his own upbringing. And what I like about him is that after finding out about the father, his biological father, there was no sense of anger per se, or any negative. Maybe it's because he was an elder himself and he had lived and he has seen things. But the issue of forgiveness comes into play. And in fact, he even went as far as changing his surname, but not deleting or erasing the stepfather's surname. In fact, he now calls himself with both surnames, which is something very beautiful, because oftentimes when we deal with such family issues, when things are dealt in secrecy, and accountability and transparency is not being brought into play, it creates a lot of war, internal war and self-conflict of who you are, your belonging as a man, your identity as a man. What is it that you are passing on to the next generation and to the next phase? So for him to deal with this, I think showed a lot of strength, and that vulnerability within men and what we may seem as a weakness can actually also be their power. And this is something that we want to reinforce even as we raise our boy children, to be more empathetic, to be more self-aware, and to live in a community that is more in harmony as we are facing these many challenges that oftentimes can end up even ruining somebody's being or the way they know they are. But in this case, he is mending his own heart. He's mending these both families. And I think I applaud that about this memoir.
So, but what will you tell parents in Nigeria, Uganda, who will say, don't teach my children about sex and about drug? I don't want them to read books on those themes.
But what is their reality? And I think also how that book is written also has an effect, and how the story is going to be narrated and told to the children also have an impact. I think in this story, the author comes to the level of those young ones. The stories are not that explicit, except to mirror what is already happening in the communities. When they look at their televisions and they listen to the music, these are the most of the things that they are already exposed to, but we try to shield them to an extent. And when we talk to them and sit them down and have these conversations with them, we try to be, they say don't feed a child meat before they can even chew. So I think the way the author has written the book, it's not explicit at all. It's still kind, it's still soft, but it provokes and alarms. And again, one can even say it can be even a campaign that we take it to the very schools to say, enough one. So to reprimand even the sellers, the people who are in these juvenile prisons because of the impact and the direct consequences of using these substance abuses and ways of trying to maintain this lifestyle and subsequently hurting communities, breaking into people's houses and so forth. So it becomes a whole string of ills that then affect these kids. So these conversations are ahead. One of the children, this might be a direct pandemic in the household. The brother might be going through this thing. One of the uncles or the aunts may be going this thing. Even worse, the mother is the one who's selling or whatever. So when we have these conversations with these children, what are their views? What is their stand, and how they want to be the change they want to see in the future? And I think that's what the author is trying to re-emphasize, to say, it is happening to us, it is happening to them, but how do we start them and have conversation with them whilst they are still young?
Thank you. Thank you. I'm coming back with more questions. Ashraf, I hope your internet is good because you have been signing in and signing off.
Yes.
It's turn now, please, your books.
First, I would like to say that my name is Fadwa, not Ashraf. Ashraf is my father's name because my phone didn't work. Thanks for listening to me. The first book I would like to talk about is this book. It mainly talks about cats and animals. It's directed to children, mainly who mistreat animals. Like they don't think they deserve to be treated right. It has a hidden message in it, but it's written in a very good way, like about cats and animals in general. The book talks about cats as creatures, like the science facts about them, and a lot. But it's also mainly about mistreating animals in general.
Written in Arabic. Who is written in Arabic?
Yes, it's written in Arabic, and it's going to be translated this year.
Okay.
English.
Who wrote it?
Actually, the author is my father.
Okay.
So maybe like I love the book. It actually talks about our cat as if she wrote the book, like she has an adventures with other cats and stuff. The second book I'd like to talk about is this book. It's called The Perfect Muslim. It's about religious unity and the unity among like Arab countries and like countries all over the world. It means okay. It's a Filipino Christian woman, lives in an uppercase Qatari family. They are called Al-Musallams at the Pearl Qatar in Doha. She has been employed by them as a nanny. She's paid well. She's happy. The Al-Musallams, who are Muslims, love her dearly. The novel starts by introducing Silang and her life as a girl living in an island in Philippines with her grandmother. The first third of the novel narrates the details of her tough life with her mother, where her mother has been killed in an earthquake. Her father was killed in a raid by police against drug criminals. Despite the warnings of her grandmother to stay away from strangers, especially like the other sex, like boys or men, she fell in love with a stranger and later was kidnapped to sell her body from there. Diwata, a businesswoman of the illegal company, arranges work for her in Qatar to change her life to like better. In the upper class Qatari family, Al-Musallams, she loved them. They treated her very well. She could read books in the son's library. The author told us about her readings. One novel was for the famous author Khalid al-Husseini, and the other was for Naguib Mahfouz, which are very famous Arab authors. And the other woman who worked with the Musallams family was from India, and alike she suffered a bitter life as a gang killed her child in front of her and forced her to work for them in a job like she didn't want to work in it. But then she went to Qatar and worked for a Musallams family, and her future got a little better, and her salary of course was lower, but at least it wasn't an illegal job to work at. The Filipino Christian woman, Silang, became her new friend, who she was a Dalit, a member of a lowest case in India. The Dalits were also formally referred to be a little unknown by other people, and it's now a term understood as a little offensive. By chance, they talk to each other about their life in Philippines and India, and the Qatari mother hears the story of the two servants. It was a coincidence for her to hear them. The two women expect they would be kicked off the house, but the Muslim mother didn't do that. In fact, she helped them financially and tried to help them as much as she could. And by the end, the two women decide to continue their life at Musallam's house, serving them, and it's a new safe home for the both of them. The last book I would like to talk about, it is Over the Garden Wall. It talks about two children who were lost in a village. In a forest. They were lost in a forest, and that forest had a lot of terrible creatures. They were really, really scared of them. And they go through a lot inside the story, but ends that the brother has to sacrifice to save his other brother. So the moral of the story is sometimes we have to sacrifice ourselves for the people who we love, even if it's hard for us, but we have to do it. Sorry?
Third book. Who is the author? The third book.
It's actually the
name of the author.
His name is Patrick.
Okay. And it's written in Arabic?
No, it's in English.
Okay.
It was a TV series in 2014, but it was a book. It was published as a book recently, and
So
I watched it when I was a child, and I was happy that it's now a book.
thank you very much. Your 3 books about human angle, our soft side.
Sorry.
Focus. I'm trying to look at your 3 books. Your choices about human angles, our relationship to animals, human relations in your 2nd book, and the 3rd one about sacrifice. Similar in some ways to the 3rd book that JahRose chose. So I love the human angle very well. So we have Abubakar on politics, and Bill on emotions, and JahRose on children, and you on the human angle of our existence. So when did you become interested in reading?
I usually watch the movie and then I read the book.
Okay.
I was interested in reading when I was a child. Maybe now I don't have much time for it because I'm like studying and stuff and exams like all the year, so I don't have time except for the subjects. But in the vacation, I really enjoy reading. It has been a part of my life since a lot.
Do you set time aside, or how do you do it? Do you say, this is when I want to do my schoolwork? This is when I want to read. How do you do it?
The school year is like 7 months, and there's 5 months left for like vacation stuff. And so I have time like in the year to read and watch movies and do my hobbies.
I have been to many spaces, African spaces, in different countries.
Mm-hmm.
Usually, 2 things happen. One, houses without reading spaces. There's no place to read, even if you want to read. And
Like,
then you have the houses of very rich people. They have the libraries, they have books there, but they don't use the library. Do you understand my question? Do you?
I think.
Okay, good.
We have a library at school.
Okay.
It's where I read the most. I love reading in it. And we actually have a mini library in home.
In your house, okay.
Yes, because like all the family has been interested in reading and writing in general. Was that your question?
Yes. So how do you think we should encourage reading among people of your age? When I was young, there were public libraries. Today, no more public libraries. What do you think we should do to revive a reading culture among people of your age?
I think we should spread awareness about the importance of reading and how it helps growing of the mind, and it feels like you live the story. You don't just read it; you live in it. So
in the age of social media, people play with their WhatsApp, with their Facebook, with their Telegram. Mm-hmm. Those technologies, don't you see them as destroying this reading habit?
Yeah, it's true. Even a lot of people started to read online, not buy books anymore. I think we should spread awareness about that, and more people should know that reading a book, like a real book, is more fun when it's like a real book, not online or.
Thank you very, very much, all the members of this great panel. We can't thank you enough. Your interests are varied. The books you have selected are also varied in Arabic, in English. Let's bring in members of the audience. They can talk about the books you have not mentioned. This will be the second segment of this conversation before we move to the third segment of policies and recommendations. Professor Dr. Okedira, your guests, are they here?
Yes, Prof. We have with us the president of the newly inaugurated Association of Writers called the World Organization of Writers. She's here, Margareta. She's from Russia, but she has a translator, Asus, who will help us to translate a few words. She wants to say hello to our panelists and the audience, as well as to let them know about the forthcoming Congress of the World Organization of Writers, which will be taking place in Abuja, Nigeria. So over to you, Asus. I hope you can interpret for Margareta. All right. We have to unmute. I think it's...
Коллеги, друзья, для меня большая честь приветствовать вас на празднике Слова. Примите мои искренние поздравления и пожелания достичь высокого уровня творчества. Пожелать вашим произведениям долгий, красивый путь к сердцам читателей, чтобы ваши слова стали самым современным воздействием на умы наших современников, и чтобы каждый ваш слог нес идею мира и солидарности между людьми нашей маленькой планеты Земля. Я представляю Всемирную организацию писателей ВАУ и совсем скоро прилечу на самый загадочный и притягательный континент Африку. И уже полюбила Нигерию только потому, что там живут и творят такие люди, как Уэлл Акедиран. Для нас будет большой радостью принять ваши творческие работы на конкурс. Времени осталось мало, до 1 марта, но я уверена, что вы успеете. У ВАУ есть гимн, и он прозвучит 4-6 апреля в Нигерии, в Абудже. И там есть главные слова: «Мы люди одной планеты». Спасибо.
Now I would like to translate. My name is Olga, and now Margarita Al. She is a poet, a writer, and she is a founder of one of the biggest literary festivals in Russia. And now she's the president of the World Organization of Writers that have been founded recently, and we have already had the first meeting in Cairo. My name is Olga. I'm also a poet and a writer, and I help Margarita and my colleagues whom I see here, well, to have this communication from heart to heart. So about the speech of Margarita. Dear colleagues and friends, it is a great honor for me to greet you at this panel discussion, and it is a feast of poetry and literature. Please accept my sincere congratulations and wishes to achieve success and high level of creativity. I hope your books and works will find the way to the hearts of the readers, not only in Africa, but in other continents too, so that your words and books have a great impact on the minds of our contemporaries, and so that each of your books carries the idea of peace and solidarity among the people of our small planet Earth. Margarita represents this World Organization of Writers, and very soon we will fly to the most mysterious and attractive continent, to Africa. And Margarita and I have already fallen in love with Nigeria because it's a beautiful country and there are such people as Vale Akedrian, who lives there, works and creates and helps us to unite the people of the earth. It will be a great pleasure for us to accept your works for the competition or for the first Congress of WOW. There is not much time left because the books are accepted till the 1st of March, but we hope that you can make it. World Organization of Writers has an anthem, a song, and it will be played on April the 4th and the 6th in Abuja in Nigeria. And there are very important words in this anthem. We are people of the same planet, and poetry unites us. Literature unites us. So with great best wishes to all of you, sincerely, the President of the World Organization of Writers, Margarita Al.
That's very moving. That's very moving. You could see the sentences coming from a great poet.
Yes.
So whose idea is this organization?
Маргарита, чья идея была эта организация?
В 2019 году 52 страны собрались на фестиваль в Республике Азербайджан, и у нас было так мало времени для общения, что возникла идея, что нам надо объединиться, встречаться пораньше, почаще, и это были писатели из 52 стран мира.
So in 2019, in Baku, in Azerbaijan, there was a great festival of writers, and there were writers from 52 countries. And that was a great event, international event. There were writers from different continents. But as the whole festival was just 3 days, and there was so many things that we wanted to say to each other, that we decided that we should meet more often, and the writers of the world should have their own congress or organization which will represent different countries and continents.
В 2023 году в Египте писатели из 18 стран мира приняли решение и написали меморандум о намерении о создании Всемирной организации писателей ВАУ, это было в Египте. А в декабре этого же года мы эту организацию зарегистрировали официально. И первый конгресс пройдет в Нигерии в 2024 году.
So in 2023, there was a meeting in Cairo, and then in Cairo, there were 13 countries were represented. And so the 18 countries were represented. And so the representatives of these countries, they wrote the memorandum of intention. So JahRose and Dr. Vale Akedrian were there and many others. So this memorandum of intention was formulated. And later on, so in December in 2023, the organization, the World Organization of Writers, was registered here in Moscow. So now it has a juridical status.
So you are going to deal with issues of many languages. Mm-hmm. Suppose there is no government to finance the meeting. How do you deal with hundreds of translators? Where do you get the money to do that?
Такой вопрос. Если сюда приедут десятки, если не сотни людей с разными языками, где найти финансы, чтобы во всяком случае были, может быть, даже десятки, если не сотни переводчиков, чтобы соединить этих людей?
Спасибо за вопрос. Есть несколько языков в мире, на котором люди общаются. И поэтому наш конкурс, например, проходит в 4 языковых группах. Это русский, английский, арабский и испанский языки. И поэтому вот в языковая группа, она поможет нам общаться. И также будут волонтеры из университетов. Это были переговоры с Валеей Кидираном по поводу переводчиков.
We thought about that and we had negotiations with Vale Kedrian about organizing moments of this type. In general, the works are accepted in 4 languages for the competition of the first Congress, and these are Russian, English, Arabic, and Spanish. These are main languages that the writers sent their books. And when we spoke about interpreters, so we hope that there will be volunteers from Nigeria and other countries, and there will be students for whom it will be incredible practice to be present in this first Congress of World Organization of Writers.
Thank you very much. Please don't go, don't leave, just stay there. So, members of the audience, questions, comments, books that our panelists have not mentioned that you think?
Hello, Prof. Somebody, I put a name on the chat box for you.
Can you call?
Yes, I like to call on a retired professor of surgery and a well-known poet who lives in Ghana, Professor Lade Wosonu, who has been with us since the beginning of the panel, of the discussion, to please say a few words.
Okay.
Ну, он сказал, что профессор из Ганы представляет...
Can you unmute yourself?
Is there...
Professor, can you unmute yourself?
Professor Lade.
Пытается позвать профессора, но он не подсоединяется пока.
А вопрос какой был, Оля?
О книгах, новые книги, представления.
Well, maybe Prof is still
ну, пока оставайся.
Challenges.
While waiting for Professor Lade, does any member of the audience, do you have something to say? Members of the audience? Usually
аудитория.
Malimbo Books, Wamgila Malimbo Books, please go ahead.
Hello, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Africa. Yes, I'm so delighted to be. First of all, much appreciate to the panelists and the moderator, and of course, everybody who is here. I'd like to straight to go to one of the books that I read. It's called The Unusual Day of an Insurance Person. It's a book that has been written by Jerry here in Tanzania. It's one of the very unique book. It's a fiction book, but it has something content with a working station of an insurance person, describing a day, just one day. How does the insurance company operates in a day? The claims, the payment, the underwriting, and everything. It is kind of a very good novel that combines all together the formal things and the fictions. Actually, I can say it's one of the novel that I've ever read. It's written by an insurance person who is practicing insurance here in Tanzania. So that is very brief, a few lines I'd like to share, and I can recommend it if anyone, yes, if anyone wants to go through it, we can recommend how to get it and enjoy the book. But purely you will love it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. If there if we do not have people from the audience, can we move to the third and final segment of this conversation? But there are some questions that I want to ask members of the panel. So, are there generational differences that you begin to notice in all these writings? Say 50s, 60s, 70s, and now, are there generational differences? Abubakar, have you observed generational differences?
Yes, I think that is obvious. And it's human nature that things will change across generations as we progress in time. I think the preoccupation of, say, the first generation of Nigerian writers or African writers generally tended to be about confronting colonization and its impact on cultures and traditions that they met on ground. The second generation sort of moved into the post-colonial period and kind of engaged with the early failings of the founding fathers, if you like, right? And then the third generation moved into a very different phase of dictatorships, tyranny, and things like that. And now I think this generation is engaging more with how the personal is political and the political is personal. So even if it seems as if some of the writings may be very individualistic, they are connected to the wider issues that are in the continent, but not in the sense that previous generations have engaged with literature and all of that. But fundamentally, as Chinua Achebe said, the duty of the writer is to document the human condition. And I think that is something that has remained constant in all this generation, that a lot of it focuses on the human condition, except that the human condition, the larger framework of that human condition has been altered by time and by shifting the moving parts that kind of constitutes and form and shape that human condition. So yes, definitely it's a change.
What about science fiction?
Yes, so that is something that I won't say it's new, because for the large part, the magical writings that we've had before, if you like, say the palm wine drinker, right? Tutola. So people may say it's magic realism, or something. If you argue it from another perspective, you say, well, that's African science fiction, right? But so in essence, the inexplicable, the unexplained, the mysterious has always existed in African literature. And now it's taking a different form in the sense that it's becoming futuristic, kind of going into the forward future and projecting things and adapting elements of the science fiction of the global West or the global North, and kind of centering it around Africans and the African narrative. And I think it's good because for me, literature is not just a tool to deconstruct the present and to engage with the history and the past, but it's also a tool to kind of imagine the future and its possibilities and project that future and kind of make it real and concrete. And if it makes it real and concrete, or makes it visual in a way that people can see it, then it becomes graspable. And people can actually see, okay, there's a possibility of doing something like this. If we remember, there's this novel by Jules Vance, The Gunshots to the Moon, which 100 years before the moon landing kind of projected that humans would make it to the moon, and his vision of it was that people would be fired from a cannon and a very large bullet to land on the moon. And incidentally, he had some of those projections right, that the best place to launch a space rocket or fire the gun that will take people to the moon or so on. Easton, he had the geolocations right. He had all of those things right. And eventually a lot of those ideas, even if they seemed very improbable at the time, right, 100 years down the line, that was almost exactly what's happened. So science fiction, very important in terms of like conceiving the idea of a future that is very different from the one that we are facing now, but then also kind of giving us ideas that, okay, you know what, this is what this future could be.
Rashid Liman. Rashid Liman.
Yes, Prof is actually Rashid and not Rashid.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. Let me congratulate the organizers and the panelists on this interesting discussion. I just wanted to pick out one book or one novel that had not been talked about that I think is really, really interesting, and readers will find it also interesting. It's a book, a novel written by Abubakar Ibrahim, When We're Fireflies. Abubakar, of course, happens to be one of the panelists. This book, I found it really, really interesting. The book is about Rehema Ndumbaro, an artist who had an encounter at the train station, and that encounter passed. So it's actually a book written in context of magical realism. I found it really interesting, and I hope viewers and the audience would also pick it up to read. Thank you.
When you are flies, right?
When we were fireflies. When we were fireflies.
Okay. Thank you, Rashida. Zainab. Zainab Ango. Zainab, are you still there? While waiting for Zainab, Bill.
Yes.
Yeah, please, your contribution, please.
Well, thank you for that.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Zainab.
She's muted.
Is it from our head?
No.
Hello, Prof.
Go ahead, please. Make your contribution.
Okay. Yes, thank you, Prof. I'm sorry I can't use the video because the connection is weak. So I'm going to do two things if permitted. One, I'm going to talk about my favorite book, and then I'm also going to raise an issue which I have been mulling over, and thankfully, Abubakar and Prof yourself, you've also talked about that issue. So for my favorite book, coincidentally, it's also Professor Rashida's favorite book, When We Were Fireflies. So why I love the book is for its sense of historicity. It's also a book steeped in magical realism, and which tells, of course, again, subtle themes of social realism about the Nigerian condition, which leads me to my second observation, which is also, I hope, is going to be addressed by you and Abubakar and perhaps other panelists, about the issue of African literature. When we talk of African literature now, and you mentioned it, and Abubakar also mentioned it, why are African writers now shying away from the idea that their writing is African, from a classification of their writing as African? For example, why is it wrong to say that an African should write about maybe Boko Haram or banditry or any of those issues that are confronting us in Africa today? Why I ask this is because, Prof, you mentioned something which I find very intriguing, that you are looking at things fall apart and you want to do sort of an archival project so that perhaps 20, 30, 40 years in time, people can actually read African novels and have a glance of African society. The way we read Charles Dickens and we see the English society of years back. So if African writers don't write about Africans, and then they don't want to write about these issues, in those years ahead to come, are we even going to see Africa at all in the scheme of things? That is one. Secondly, we must also admit that the teaching of history across Africa is dying. And this is why I'm very suspicious of an agenda when we come to the issue of this Afropolitanism, or writers saying they are now global citizens and they want to write in consonance with their individuality or their humanity. Well, it is good. However, history is not being taught now. Very few schools teach history in Nigeria, in Ghana, in South Africa. And perhaps 30, 40, 50 years to come, we don't pray. But what if history is no longer taught? What will be our archives? What will we turn to? Can we read our novels and see Africa of yesteryears? This is my observation, and I hope that we can discuss it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senab. I will let the members of the panel answer the question, but bear in mind how capitalism affects what we do. So the power of the market, how many books are you selling? Who is going to invite you for speaking engagements? So as people now say, okay, these are the strategies that will work for them the best or the most, they begin to say this is how they will do their self-presentation, in which they say if they are artists and not African artists, or if they are creative writers and not African creative writers, perhaps that may open more opportunities for them. And those are the challenges we face, in which there is the fear that on the African side, they can't make money, they can't survive on those books. But on the Western side, maybe they can survive. And this issue has been with us for some time. And you find the same thing in soccer, in the Olympics, in which individuals are now repositioning themselves. Afrobeats superstars have become very successful in leveraging many, many markets, both in Africa and outside of Africa. The extent to which writers like Bill and Abubakar and JahRose will do what people in Afrobeats are doing is a subject of conversation for the future. But let me ask Bill a question.
Thank you.
So how do we manage ongoing political crisis in terms of literary presentation, in terms of poetry? The Ambazonia in Cameroon, for instance, how does literature connect with that? And what is our responsibility?
Well, the writer, first of all, has the responsibility of bringing the dirty linen of the society to the attention of those that be in power, with the hope that they learn and clean their act. We understand that in life, many people are happy to show the good side of them, and they are not happy when the bad side of them is being shown. And the writer's role is one of commitment. A writer cannot disengage. A writer, the African writer, cannot be a producer of art for art's sake. And if the African writer cannot be a producer of art for art's sake, the writer would have to take sides with either the oppressed and tone their cry a lot harder, or join the oppressor in singing praise songs that would not stand the test of time. So we writers, to engage in politics, we have to be visionaries. We have to think not in terms of what benefits us. You did mention writing about writing to suit the market. The market should not condition the writing. The writing should condition the market. Because there are things, if we don't talk about, nobody will talk about. I will borrow from one of our sister writers, Zora Neale Hurston, who, in writing a book about the last captured slave who was brought into this country, who happens to be Yoruba, wrote this person's life in the language, just as the person spoke. And because her English in that writing was not good enough, she was pushed into abject poverty. But she stood her grounds, and it is something I echoed before, that our literature must not be judged by foreign standards. And we shouldn't allow the validation of our works to come from elsewhere.
So if you say that, how will you respond to issues around what is called world literature? Are we part of world literature?
Yes. Yes. I will say look at when they say world literature, I don't know how the teachers of that literature considers world literature. If they consider Africa as part of the world, then African literature is world literature. It's part of the literature of this world. It tells the story and life experiences of people in that part of the world, and it connects to a larger whole. You asking this, and I just remember Brother Abubakar's intervention earlier on, talking about magical realism and citing. When you asked about the shift in the younger generation, I just had a conversation with a younger African writer who is a scientist and a systems engineer. And he made me to start thinking literature in engineering terms, because he drew attention to the fact that Achebe, in writing Things Fall Apart, did not write as a storyteller. And many people have not observed that Achebe was using his scientific knowledge and writing as an engineer of systems, as a systems engineer. So Things Fall Apart becomes a narrative about a system that was functioning fully well until there was a disruption that derailed the train. And now, as a young writer, he is encouraging writers to see how we can pick those pieces together and show how the various parts that can function independently can all come together for the greater good. And when you ask about world literature, I see African literature as a literature that can stand alone on its own. But that literature can also connect to other literatures to explain, to underscore what is plaguing humanity at large. So I would not object, because philosophically, we might want to argue about the terms when they say world literature. Africa is part of the world, so I'll include African literature as part of that literature.
Oh, thank you, sir.
Yeah, can I intervene and hopefully attempt to answer Dr. Zango's question?
Okay.
about African literatures, kind of maybe repudiating the title African writer. I am an African writer, and all the African writers that I know who are African identify themselves as African writers.
Yeah.
When we protest against that labeling, it is not that we are protesting that we are African writers writing literature about Africa. We're protesting the connotative meaning of it, right? The implied meaning when someone who is not African says African literature. Because in most instances, that means that your book, considered African literature, is considered first inferior. Second, it is judged by a certain parameters, which means that it should explain your Africanness, it should explain your humanness, it should explain your identity. It is not treated on the same parameters that other literatures are treated with. So the liberties that writers from other geographies have are not allowed to writers of African descent, because you're expected to conform to these certain rules. Also, that means that the placement of your book is probably going to be in a corner, a very neglected corner in a library, right? Where they say, oh, the African titles are over there. That is what we protest against. That's the connotative meaning or the implication of saying, oh, this is an African. It should be put on the same pedestal as every other literature. The same way that European literature is considered European literature and given proper attention and treated with the same liberties, or afforded these liberties to write about whatever they want to write about, right? Professor Indé mentioned this aspect that I thought is very important, right? Where you say, well, you know, this is African literature. It's not allowed to be expressive in the terms of being art for art's sake. It must speak about politics. It must speak about culture. It must speak about colonialism. It mustn't speak about any of those things if it doesn't want to speak about it. If it wants to speak about the sun shining, that's fine. If it wants to speak about, you know, the grassland, that's fine. If it wants to talk about politics, it can talk about politics. If it wants to talk about dictatorship, it's fine to talk about it. So it's that connotation that we are avoiding, and that's what we are protesting against. I hope this is clear, that there's no point, or there's no African writer that I know personally who is renouncing his identity as an African writer, or her identity as an African writer, or who is renouncing that, oh, you know what I'm writing is African. Whatever we write is definitively African, but that also doesn't mean, because there's this generalization that is applied to say, well, you know, your writing as an African should address poverty, you should address refugees in a camp, you should address female genital mutilation. When we wake up to write in the morning, we don't wake up and say, oh, you know what, I'm an African writer, now I'm going to do what African writers do. We write from the perspective of individuals, right? Yeah. And when we think of our characters, we don't think of them as, oh, you know, this is an African character, so what does an African character do? We think of them as individuals who are constrained by certain circumstances within the immediate environment in which they exist, right? It happens to be in Africa, fine. If they happens to be of African descent, traveling all over the place and face the peculiar challenges that Africans face, like in Kalafa Palanga's book, you know, being discriminated against, being treated to certain immigration protocols and things like that, that's fine and good. But it's unreasonable to say, well, you know, because you're an African writer, your story must explain Africa, your characters must do peculiar things that Africans should do. They should have AIDS, they should die from AIDS, they should die from poverty, or if they want salvation, they have to run to the West, or the white person has to come and save them and fix everything and things like that. That is what we are protesting against. Thank you.
Very much. Olayinka Agbetui, your contribution, please. We have 15 more minutes.
Thank you very much, Professor. Zainab Ango has actually touched on a very important point. You are implicated in the question she asked regarding history. So my first question will be to you. In spite of your popularity and deliberate attempt to popularize history, she says in many African countries, history is not being taught the way it should be taught. How do we solve this problem? We'll come back to that later. The second one is where you intervened and talked about capitalism dictating what people choose to write. Now, I identify today as a professor of comparative arts. My roots solidly in comparative literature in Nigeria, major. And then over the years, I was exposed to the other arts, of which now in the past 10 years, I have chosen to specialize in musicology. The reason is this: music is the only international language in the world. The language of music is the language of chords. Let me illustrate. There are only one or two people when I go on to see how many people have been downloading a particular music track. Wake Me Up is one of the very few written in Europe that achieved 20,000 downloads within a few months. A Nigerian achieved that within the past 6 to 9 months, whose name is called Rehema. He was using what I originally disapproved of as language, which is speaking English. That's what he sang the song with. It competed with any language in the world and went to the top shot. That is the importance of music as comparative arts. Now, I identify more, and I wouldn't really want to excuse the apologia by Abubakar Ibrahim, and would rather say what Bill Indé says should be our focus. We shouldn't care. When it comes to literature, it comes as a package of the way of life of characters being represented in the produced work. I can't write, if I'm a Nigerian writer, with the consciousness and sensibilities of a European. Whether I like it or not, what I write as a Nigerian will not be able to compete with those written by Europeans in Europe. Why not really just accept it and write as Nigerian? And whether we swim off or sink with that, let us accept that. That is my comment on what we do. Now, the second question, why history is not so popular? It is because it has not been legislated to be popular in schools. And I will appeal directly to Professor Falola to intervene, to make sure in the curriculum, at least in the school cert, GCE O levels, 3 languages should be made popular. The language of history, that is, until you do your GCSE, history must be made a compulsory subject. What are you writing about if you don't know your past? English should be, as a measure of international language of Francophone African languages spoken countries, and French in the others, but the indigenous language, I've been advocating this now for over 10 years, the indigenous catchment language of the area in which the school is situated should be the 3rd language that should be enforced until people get to high school graduation level. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll respond. Professor Motayo Oloruntoba Oju. Oloruntoba Oju, your comment. We have 10 more minutes.
I'll be very brief, Prof. Thank you very much for putting this together, and thank you to, I hope I can, sorry, my network is really poor here, so I don't want to, can you hear me?
Very well.
Okay.
Very well.
So I appreciate the very incisive and insightful discussions that we have had today. I just want to quickly add that, and I'm glad that everybody has said that, practically all the speakers, that we have no choice but to be committed. We have no choice but to promote African literature. And African writers have no choice but to push out committed literature. Having said that, I want to say that there are certain things we need to do quickly too. There's very little patronage of African literature, even here in Africa. At least I can talk of Nigeria, if I can't talk of other places. We have programs, we have courses that are almost entirely excluding African literature in the curriculum. NUC sits there and designs what they call a minimum, a benchmark. And the universities then have just a few more courses to add. And you have an entire 4-year program where you have only one course on African drama, for instance, and 1 or 2 other courses on introduction to African literature. There's a problem there. So even our students in English departments are not sufficiently familiar with African writing, and we must go back to address some of these things. Tied to that is the bigger issue of a reading culture. We need to get our literature read. Poetry should be read, chanted. How many universities run reading sessions? I know the difficulty, the political climate, the economic problems, but we have to sit down and brainstorm on the way forward. We must take literature to the doorstep, African literature to the doorsteps of people. The movie, home video has taken over the stage practically. We must go back to some of these things. And of course, I've talked about the issue of curriculum, even publishing. And I'm going to appeal to people like Professor Toyin Falola also. Maybe that's putting you on the spot, I'm sorry. But whatever can be done to encourage indigenous publishers to publish more, to take interest in young writers and publish them, and then to change the orientation of these writers also, so that they are not necessarily looking towards all the time international publishers. Until we begin to do all of these things, we are going to be in serious problem. Finally, I want to say that, of course, African literature, I teach world literature. I teach introduction to the theater. And the textbooks will say the origin of the theater is from the Greeks. And I tell my students that every culture has its own theater. The African theater, the Greeks are not, if you talk of literate or written, documented, fine. But if you are talking of theater as practice, then every culture has its own theater. This goes back to the issue of curriculum. We must begin to address all of these things. Going back to world literature, the point I was going to make is that African literature constitutes part of African literature. After all, Irish literature is part of African world literature, sorry. European literature is part of world literature. Shakespeare wrote for his people. Pick any Shakespeare. Brecht, if you pick any Brechtian play, you will know it. In any case, Brecht's plays were translated from German to English. So what are we talking about? We should use more of an indigenous languages and promote the translation of these works. The ones that are in English already, we should promote their translation into indigenous languages so that there will be more access to African literature. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Rennie, please. Rennie. Rennie, go ahead, please.
Yes. Hello. Thank you. I just wanted to comment briefly, please. Yes, African literature is part of world literature. Even if you refer to someone like Shakespeare, who wrote Othello, for instance, the play Othello references the fact that Africans conquered part of Europe, and that is one of the reasons why it was normal for an African to be present in Europe in a position of authority, which is what Shakespeare was documenting in Othello. So literature references history, it references geography. So I want to appeal, to join the appeal about geography and history being restored to the curriculum also. And then the other thing is, it doesn't matter what label any writer decides to put upon themselves. Their writing alone documents themselves and the context in which they are. So if they want to be world people, if they want to be local people, however it is they position themselves, whatever they write ends up reflecting what is going on in the world that they live in, which would also include the local aspect of Africa and the international aspect of Africa. Thank you.
Those are great comments. Professor Lade Wusonu, the poet and the surgeon from Ghana, are you back? Is Professor Lade Wusonu around now? Okay, let us now begin to close. JahRose is on break. If she comes back, and the way when Professor Lade comes back, you can interrupt me. Let us close. How do we move African literature forward in terms of more greater visibility, greater reward? I'd once suggested the creation of an endowment to take care of creatives who have no income, who have no pension. How do successful writers feed if they don't have academic jobs? And things like that. So let me allow Dr. Okediro to moderate this closing session in terms of how you want these creatives to, literary writers to move forward.
Okay, thank you, Professor Falola. Well, people are giving us some suggestions, but I'll quickly go around the panelists to, well, what is your suggestion? I see you in Ghana, people here about the world. So how are you able to attract so much attention? And how do you think this can also be done by other writers?
Whom are you asking? You're asking Abubakar, you're asking Bill?
Abubakar.
Oh, okay.
I said that
yes.
you're a good ambassador of African literature. How have you been able to do it? And how do you what's your prescription for others to follow your footsteps?
So this is going to be my response, and it's going to tie in with what Dr. Agbetu said earlier about African literature not being able to compete with world literatures. And I find that statement very objectionable, to be honest, because what we're arguing about is for African writers and their writing to be acknowledged on its own terms, right? Basically, that's it. And I'm not sure how very engaged he is with contemporary African literature, especially by the younger generations who are writing their stories regardless of what anyone thinks. And the basic assumption now is that, we are writing irrespective of the Western gaze. And we are writing our African stories, and we're writing them the way we want to write. And if they are deemed good enough for our African audience, that's fine with us. If they are not, that's okay. It doesn't mean that we are compromising. Yes, there are writers who do compromise and write stuff because they want European publishers and all of that. But the reality is that when you say, well, you compare music and literature, they are very different. The production model is different. The marketing model is different. How many African publishers do we have on the continent? How much money do we have going on in the publishing industry? It's a very little, and the few people who are publishing are people who are doing it because they are very passionate about it, not because that they have enough money to do it. Right? They produce books, they sell books. Sometimes the money doesn't come back, sometimes it does. Right? The profit margin is very limited if there's a profit margin at all. So there are all these challenges that we must face. We must acknowledge that, okay, this is the thing. These people are busy producing, trying to set up these production industries on the continent to cover the continent, trying to network on the continent. The market in Europe and America is dominated by European and American publishers who are stupendously rich, who have the reach, and who have cordoned off that space and refuse to allow anyone access into it. So at this point in time, African book publishers are trying to build the capacity to produce books and distribute them within their countries, and then to form connections and alliances that will allow them to kind of move books from one African country to another. Nigeria is next door to the Benin Republic. How many authors do we know from Benin Republic? How many authors do we know from Niger? Right? The point of our interaction with them is if they go to France, they get their books translated into English, it comes back to Nigeria, we read it. Same thing with Nigerian books going to Niger, or to Benin, or to Cameroon. It has to go to England, probably, get translated into French, and then shipped down to Cameroon. So at this point, it would be ridiculous to say, oh, you know what, we can do our thing, ignoring all of that, because we can't even connect to each other without the intervention of those foreign capitals. So that is the first point. Second point, we are writing our stories. We believe in ourselves. We write our stories the way we want to write them. And that is the way we go. I'm very cognizant of what is called the Western gaze. And I often ignore it because I just don't feel like I'm writing stories for white people. I'm writing stories for people. It doesn't matter who they are. Right? But my first audience are the people whose stories I take and I write about. And as long as they're satisfied with that, then I'm fine with it. Secondly, there's this question of, what happens that we are complicit in the history or the failure of teaching history and all of that. And I'm like, you know what? African writers, not only African writers, writers generally, writers especially of historical fiction, are not writing history. They are using their imagination to fill in the cracks in history. Right? Something happens, there's a crack somewhere, there's crack to be filled using imagination, and that is what writers of historical fiction do. Talk about Maza Mingeste, for instance, talk about Leila Aguilera, and talk about other African writers who have written in historical fiction. And you read all of that, what do you see? They are filling in the gap. They are taking events that happened in the history, and it's the same thing, not only in African literature, but everywhere. So if Africa and our governments and our education system fails to institute the teaching of history, fails to sustain the teaching of history in schools, it will be maybe unreasonable to expect African writers to fill that gap, because you can't use something that is filling the crack to replace the actual substance that is there. That substance has to be there before whatever is used to fill the crack becomes relevant. So as far as I'm concerned, African writers are performing the duties that they can perform. Yes, we are not perfect because the system is not perfect, but we are pushing. We're pushing the envelope, we're pushing the boundaries. And in the next few years, 20 years ago, a lot of these things went in existence. Because we're basically coming out of dictatorship, the production industry has been broken down and collapsed and dismantled. Now people are building things all over from scratch. This is not something that we inherited from the 1960s, from the colonial administration. Whatever you're seeing now is basically the things that were built in the last 20, 30 years. And if we continue on this trajectory, God help us with this crazy economy that's happening in the country that is threatening to kill everything all over again. But, if we continue on this trajectory, I imagine that in the nearest future, African literature produced by Africans and distributed by Africans is going to be the standard. And hopefully we can do away with the intervention and reliance on colonial capitals to kind of get our books and on the continent. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Abubakar. Let me quickly take a detour and ask Margarita to come in at this point. So as Susu, you will interpret for her. How do you think because we have been told that African literature is part of world literature. How do you think the WOW can assist African writers to improve their skills? Sorry, you have to unmute yourself. Please unmute. We can't hear you. Asus, we can't hear you. Unmute.
Вопрос был такой: африканская литература является частью мировой литературы. Вопрос, как наша организация ВАУ может содействовать. Маргарита.
Не поняла, что наша организация в конце?
Содействовать тому, чтобы африканская литература стала частью мировой литературы.
Спасибо за вопрос. 2 дня назад я была в Азербайджане, город Баку, и мы проводили пресс-конференцию, которая называлась «Всемирная организация писателей ВАУ. Интеграция азербайджанских писателей в мировое сообщество». И был задан точно такой же вопрос. И, конечно же, мы говорили о том, что в первую очередь это переводы и взаимообмен литературами. И, конечно же, площадки, на которых мы встречаемся.
So not very long ago, Margarita was in Baku in Azerbaijan, and they asked absolutely the same question: how Azerbaijan literature could be integrated into the world literature. And so the decision, and in the discussion, we decided that the most important thing is translation, so that translation of the books goes on, and then it spreads to different countries and continents. And the second important way is to meet, to have congresses, festivals, and we hope that the first Congress in Nigeria will help in great way to solve this problem.
И самый интересный момент был то, что на встрече были молодые писатели, и когда они узнали об этой возможности, Союз писателей Азербайджана делегировал 2 молодых писателей в Африку, в Нигерию, на конгресс, чтобы решать проблемы молодых писателей.
And also very important issue is the issue of young writers, because they promote their ideas and their creative work. And so when Margarita was in Baku in Azerbaijan, so 2 young writers were delegated to the first Congress of WOW in Nigeria, and they will be present at this very important event.
Еще хочу поделиться одним фактом. Мы проводим литературные фестивали, и мы уже провели 6 таких фестивалей, и это будет 7-й фестиваль. Первый фестиваль мы провели Россия, Казахстан, Азербайджан, Турция, Египет, Нигерия, и где следующий будет, покажет тот конкурс, который мы проводим. А конкурс дает лучшие произведения литераторов мира.
So also we as organization, we have already held 6 very important literary events, literary festivals. The first one was in Russia, the second was in Kazakhstan, the third was in Turkey, then in Egypt, and now we will be holding our event in Nigeria, and the winner who will be chosen from the competition, so that will be like in the Olympics. The next our meeting will be in the country of the winner, of the laureate of the first World Congress of Writers. Okay. All right. Thank you very much for your attention. We'll have a lot of things to discuss when we come to Nigeria.
Thank you. I think Professor Dr. Okedira's internet. I think it has failed.
All right.
Well, let me now call on everybody to make their closing statements. Professor Indé, your closing statement. My good friend.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to make a closing statement. And I would just like to say this, that the greatest celebration that African writing should showcase, and as have been and is trending, is that of the strength of Blackness to divert attention from centuries of hurt that Blacks have endured, we can say through enslavement, colonization, neocolonialism, dictatorships, summary execution, and the oppression from within. So in this effort that we are engaged in, we should look. The challenging question is, where do we go from here with this literature? We should look at our literature from the perspective of the various nations as independent functioning systems and see how we could bring together all of these systems to function as one for the greater good of the African literature. And I would say, long live African literature, long live African history, and we can do a whole lot popularizing our literatures by starting the training of literature from homes, or by sensitizing the populace on the importance of understanding our own literature. Professor Falola, I thank you for this opportunity. I thank you, and I look forward to many other conversations. Thank you.
Am I supposed to say something?
Thank you, Professor Indé. Okay, yes, please, quickly.
Okay. I think there's a need for us to be deliberate about approaching African literature, both in terms of the production of it and the consumption of it. We need to understand what is happening in other spaces outside our comfort zones. What are writers in Angola writing about? What are people like Kalafe Palanga writing about? What are people like Onjaki, Mia Kutu, Agualusa, what are they writing about? What are writers in Zimbabwe and Namibia, like Cynthia Dele, what are they writing? What are people like Zukiswa Vana writing? Right? We need to kind of be deliberate about this. I understand it's difficult to find books. It's kind of hard, but I think if we are deliberate about it and go about it like, I want to study and understand the writing from Zimbabwe, right? I think we'll find literature, we'll find the writers who are writing it, we'll find all these people. And also this disconnect between sub-Saharan and sub-Saharan literature and the literature of North Africa, right? I feel it's something that needs to be kind of broken down. That's disconnect. There needs to be a bridge that connects all of Africa. Unfortunately, of course, because of the language barrier and the lack of translation within the continent, I think a lot of people are not aware of the literature of places like Seychelles and Mauritius, and other African countries that speak Spanish, for example. So there is a gap that we, both as writers and readers, and especially as academics, need to be deliberate about overcoming and building bridges, and kind of actually introducing our students to this literature. So hopefully, if we keep that going, we will be able to define our terms and define our writing. I was told of an Indian writer who is one of the best-selling authors in the world, but he has never been published anywhere outside of India. His books are published only in India, and it's being consumed by Indians. I think if we become deliberate about what we do, then I think in the nearest future, African writers can have global bestsellers without necessarily needing to be published in Europe or also. Thank you very much. And thanks to everyone who joined. Thank you, Professor Falola and Dr. Kedera, for putting this together.
Thank you very much. It's now my turn to thank all of you. Power, we're very grateful for this collaboration, our new friends from Russia. We are very grateful. We wish you all the best as you put this new initiative together, which is yet another way to transform literature and bring all of us together into one big pool. We thank all our panelist members, the two ladies who have to leave us because of circumstances beyond their control, the man behind Mount Kilimanjaro. We wish you all the best. We are very grateful. And hopefully you will write more motivational books to inspire us, young and old alike. And we thank Abubakar. We wish you more glory. Maybe you end up winning the Nobel the way you are proceeding now. And congratulations, all members of our audience. We are very grateful. We normally play some music after this event, and the music will start now. Thank you very much. We meet you on Sunday again, and we are going to discuss the use of African languages to write. Thank you.
Thank you very much.